How are you doing these days? Are you completing your assignment? You're preparing for the presentation that will take place after a couple of weeks. After a couple of weeks, you will have a presentation on critical thinking through your representative, through group representative, and then we will have a kind of question and answers, right? Each group members will be asked about the content of the assignment, and grading and marking will be based on that question and answer, right? Try to prepare for your presentation and try to submit the draft of the paper ahead of the presentation, before the presentation, okay? Before the presentation, try to submit it and I will evaluate it, and I will try to make some comment on your general progress. Get in, please. We're going to look into the concept of informal fallacies. This session, our topic will be informal fallacy. The concept informal itself suggests something about formal, isn't it? Informal suggests the presence of formal fallacies. Our focus is in informal fallacy in this particular chapter, more specifically with typical 22 types of informal fallacies, typically common in our everyday conversations, in our everyday reasoning, in research, in publication, magazine, newspaper, or media. We have 22 types of typical informal fallacy that we're going to cover this particular chapter. This does not mean that these 22 types of informal fallacies are exhaustive, right? They're not. It does not mean that they are complete. We do have some other types of informal fallacies which are not the focus of our attention in this particular chapter. They are not the focus. They are not the subject of our attention. We're concerned with the 22 most common informal fallacies. What do you understand by the word informal? And what is its relation with formal fallacies? Kananisa Bakala. Kananisa Ballata. Kananisa Ballata. No? That's not a fake name? What is similarity and difference between informal and formal fallacies? Kananisa and Kena Adula. Kena Adula Galo. Okay. Okay, Kananisa, Kena. Right. Informal suggests what? Informal fallacies that we're going to cover this section is divided into 5 main groups, namely fallacy of relevance, fallacy of weak induction, fallacy of presumption, ambiguity, and grammatical analogy into 5 major groups. Objective of this particular chapter is, by the end of this chapter, you will be able to define what fallacies is, how does it weaken our argument, differentiate between formal and informal fallacies, identify and classify informal fallacies into their 5 main groups, apply our knowledge of fallacies to identify their presence in real-world scenario, describe the specific reasoning errors committed in each category of informal fallacies, evaluate the impact of fallacies on the strength and validity of argument, link different types of fallacies to broader concepts in critical thinking and logic, detect and label fallacies within your own written and spoken English, as well as the argument of others, right? Develop the strategy to recognize and avoid using the fallacy in your own argument. They are interrelated but slightly different, right? Assess the effectiveness of various techniques for identifying and correcting fallacies. Critically evaluate your own understanding of fallacies and area of improvement. articulate the importance of recognizing and avoiding fallacies in effective communication and decision making, right? These are detailed objectives, aims, and significance of the study of this particular chapter. First thing first, define fallacy. Before delving into formal and informal, what is the word fallacy? Kananisha Khalid Muhammad. Test serial Sarhab. ها؟ لمن بجزء ريبورت على رك. بيكالا كدوديتو بفيت كادما ما ساوق نبر بر. بيبلوينا escape mechanism مفترض تشيل. The same thing is true for كنا مولاتو or مولاتو. أنتنا السرامات. You will be punished. You will receive your penalty. What is a fallacy? Define fallacy. The word fallacy. It is technical, literal meaning, and its technical meaning. Conventional meaning and direct meaning. ቅድስት አትናቴዎስ, right? Yes. Fallacy, the word fallacy refers to what? Fallacy is an error, right? Fallacy is an error as well as trick, right? It's not only error, it's also a trick. When do we consider a fallacy as an error, and when do we consider as a trick? Get it, please. A fallacy literally means an error or a trick. When do we consider it as an error or a mistake or a defect, and when do we consider it as trick? A fallacy is considered as an error if it occurs what? Accidentally. Accidentally. We call it a trick of reasoning if it occurs intentionally, purposely, right? People purposely commit fallacy for the purpose of easily manipulating the audience, for the purpose of easily manipulating, swaying, controlling the reader or the audience. They purposely commit fallacy, right? Fallacy can either be error or trick. It is an error if it occurs unknowingly, unintentionally, and we call it a trick if it occurs knowingly. Fallacy can be either formal or informal. A formal fallacy is something that we have already been accustomed in the first chapter. It's a kind of fallacy that can be identified by its form, and whereas informal, it cannot be identified by its form, by its structure, but it can be identified by looking into its content, right? For example, if A then B, it's not A, therefore it's not B. It is formally fallacious. It's formally fallacious. Denying the antecedent is formally fallacious, no matter its content. You can come up with counter-example that will falsify the form of the argument, right? You don't have to come up with a counter-example in order to validate its fallaciousness or non-fallaciousness, right? Formal fallacies can easily be identified by looking into the form, the structure of the argument, right? Whereas informal fallacy, we need to come up with the content, meaning each particular phrase should be translated into what? Into phrase or words or content in order to understand its fallacious nature, right? The same thing is true for affirming the consequent. It's formally fallacious, right? You can come up with a counterexample in order to illustrate the fallacy of the general argument, right? Affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent are always what? Formal fallacies, no matter their content is. No matter their content is. Whereas informal fallacies, we need to investigate the content of each phrase. We need to look into the meaning of each word. Each word structure itself does not help us to identify the informal fallacy of a particular argument, right? We need to look into each meaning. For example, all factories are planned all plants are things that contain chlorophyll, therefore all factors are things that contain chlorophyll. Formally, it's what? Not fallacious. All A are B, all B are C, therefore all A are C. It's what? It's not formally fallacious. But it is formally, informally it is fallacious. You can tell me what's wrong with this. All factors are plant, all plants are things that contain chlorophyll, therefore all factors are things that contain chlorophyll. What's wrong with this argument? What is wrong with this argument? Structurally, formally, all A are B, all B are C, therefore all A are C. It's formally, it's not fallacious, but informally, it is fallacious. What's wrong with this argument? All factors are plant, all plants are things that contain chlorophyll, therefore all factors are things that contain chlorophyll is informally fallacious, formally not fallacious. The word plant is used ambiguously, isn't it? The word plant is one thing in the first premise, and the word plant is another thing in the second premise, right? The word plant is used into two contexts, into two sense in a single argument. The fallacy is known as equivocation. We'll come to that point later on, right? Informal fallacy, we need to look into the meaning of each word, each phrase in the argument in order to identify it, right? Informal fallacy is divided into 5 main groups. The kind of informal fallacy that we're going to cover this particular chapter is divided into 5 major groups. The first major group, fallacy of relevance, has got something in common. What makes the first group different from the second one? And something for the second from the third, fourth, they do have some certain peculiar features. So the first question that you need to address yourself is, what is the common feature? Common characteristic feature of fallacy of relevance. Most of them, fortunately, are self-explanatory. The name itself tells us something about their essence. Fallacies of relevance. What do you understand by this group? What is their common feature? What is the common characteristic feature of fallacies of relevance? Fallacies of relevance share something in common. What is that? Relevance. The word itself tells us something about the essential features. Fallacies of relevance include appeal to pity, appeal to force, appeal to people, straw man, accident, red herring, missing the point, and argument against the person, right? They do have some certain common characteristic feature. They share in common. The same thing is true for fallacy of weak induction. Unqualified authority, appeal to ignorance, false cause, hasty generalization, slippery slope, weak analogy. They do have some common characteristic feature that makes them different from other groups, right? Picking the constant, complex, constant, false dichotomy, suppressed evidence, equivocation, amphibole, division, and compositions. 22 informal fallacies categorized into 5 major groups. Fallacy of relevance share something in common, that the premise used in the argument may be psychologically relevant, but logically irrelevant. What do you understand by this? The premise is psychologically persuasive or emotionally appealing, but the premise is logically irrelevant. What's psychological relevance and logical relevance? The premises are psychologically relevant, but logically irrelevant. What's psychological relevance? What is the subject matter of psychology? ቅድስት ወለላው ቅድስት ወለላው absent. Karim absent. Okay. What is the subject matter of psychology? Anta, ማነው ስምህ? Yes. ቅዱስ ማን? Ayal, yes. What is the subject matter of psychology? What does it mean? Fallacy of relevance are psychologically relevant, but logically irrelevant. Kalkidan, psychological relevance. Psychology has to do with emotion, isn't it? Emotion. Emotion. Now, the premise contains the emotion of force, the emotion of pity, the emotion of love, the emotion of hatred, the emotion of belongingness, or etc., right? But it lacks logical relevance, reason, or evidence. It lacks evidence or reason to support the conclusion, right? They try to use the emotion of love, hatred, belongingness, force, brute force, or threat, direct or indirect threat, in order to assert the conclusion, right? The premises are psychologically persuasive or relevant, emotionally appealing, but they are logically irrelevant. They don't support the conclusion on concrete, relevant evidence or reason. As a result, the conclusion may seem to follow from the premise, creating psychological illusion of validity, right? Even though there is no logical connections, right? Appeal to force, the emotion of force. Appeal to pity, the emotion of pity or compassion, right? Appeal to people, the emotion of what? The emotion of belongingness, the emotion of love, hatred, or the emotion of the majority, bandwagon, or etc., right? The same thing true for straw man, exaggerations, misrepresentations, accidents, missing the point, red herring. They all share something in common, that the premise is psychologically relevant, but logically irrelevant. Let's see them separately. Appeal to force is also known as the Latin term ad baculum. The Latin term, you need to pay attention to those Latin terms as well. You need to pay particular attention to those Latin terms. Ad baculum, baculum refers to what? Cudgel or stick, literally. Baculum refers to cudgel or stick. It's a fallacy where someone tries to win an argument by using the threat of negative consequence if you disagree, right? By neglecting logical reasoning or evidence, the arguer emphasizes on the negative consequence that will occur to you if you don't agree with his conclusion, right? The threat can be physical or psychological. The threat can be implicit or explicit. The threat can be direct or indirect, from physical violence to social exclusion. The consequence can be designed to exploit your vulnerability. It can be direct or veiled. It can be covered, overt or covered. It bypasses truth and logic, regardless of the validity of your point. Ad baculum aims to silence you through fear, not reason or evidence. For example, you should agree with my political view, or else I'll make you lose your job and ruin your reputation, right? It emphasizes on the negative consequence that will occur on the audience by neglecting reason or evidence associated with the argument, right? If you don't support my proposal, I will spread damage rumor about you. If you don't comply, I will physically harm you, right? They all emphasize on the negative consequence by neglecting reason or evidence, right? But we do have certain exceptions to appeal to force, right? Some arguments may resort some kind of negative consequence, but they may not be considered as appeal to force fallacy, right? Such as what? Facts and consequence, which is naturally interrelated events. Neutral statement of cause and effect may not be considered as appeal to force fallacy. When force or its threat is not used to persuade, but simply to inform about negative consequence tied to an action, it ceases to be fallacy. It becomes a neutral statement of actions. Neutral statement or during self-preservation and legality. Statement like, if you smoke, you increase your risk of lung cancer. I'm not trying to coerce someone to stop smoking, but simply stressing a factual consequence. Similarly, if someone is encroaching, informing them of potential legal consequence, being arrested is not manipulation, but informing them of the reality of their action, right? If you don't smoke, then your lung will be in jeopardy. It's what? It's a threat, right? Threatening the person, but that particular trait may not be considered as fallacious. Why? Because it is natural cause-effect relationships. Smoking and lung cancer, it's a natural cause-effect relationship, right? The same thing is true for, if you don't get my bag back, I will call the police. It's what? A threat. It's a threat. But the threat may not be considered as fallacious. Why? Because it falls within the boundary of legal framework, legal framework. If someone tries to encroach or infringe your legal right, then you may resort to some kind of negative consequence for his or her action. That kind of argument may not be considered as fallacious. It may not be considered as fallacious because clear boundaries and legalities or self-preservations or natural cause-effect relationship may not be considered as appeal to force fallacy or argumentum ad baculum fallacy, right? A neutral state of affairs or legal state of affairs may not be under the category of appeal to force fallacy, right? Appeal to force fallacy occurs when a person intentionally neglects reason and logic and come up with a negative consequence for supporting the argument that he or she trying to assert, right? That he or she trying to assert. You need to bear in mind these three exceptions, right? The same thing is true for appeal to people. Appeal to people, the emotion is what? The emotion of love, respect, admiration, value, recognition, and acceptance are emphasized by replacing reason and evidence, right? The arguer tries to use or manipulate or try to sway, control the attitude of the audience by using the feeling of respect, the feeling of love or admiration, right? By neglecting the importance of reason and evidence in order to support the conclusion, right? It has to approach, direct approach occurs when an arguer addresses a large group of people and use emotional tactic to stir up the crowd's emotion and enthusiasm, aiming to gain acceptance for their conclusion. The objective is to create a sense of collective mind or mob mentality. You can open the slide from your account, right? You can open the slide on slide number 13. Direct approach occurs when an arguer addresses a large group of people directly. Argumentum ad populum, the direct approach, occurs when an arguer directly addresses a large group of people. It's mainly common in religious speech and political demagogues, political speech and religious preachings, right? On slide number 13, you can see the example. Example on slide number 13. Did you get it? On slide number 13. Direct approach of appeal to people occurs when? Direct approach of appeal to people occurs when a single person addressing large group of people. And whereas indirect approach of appeal to people, when? It can be a group of people towards a group of people or a single person towards a single person. Right? It may not necessarily be a single person towards a group of people. In a direct approach, a single person addressing towards a group of people by what? By steering, by arousing their emotion, and by neglecting the importance of reason and evidence, aiming to gain acceptance for their conclusion. The objective is to create a sense of collective mindset. A sense of collective mindset, of mob mentality among the audience. Look at the example. Join us in protesting against this policy. We're the voice of the people, and together we can make a difference. Let's show the government that we will not stand for this injustice. It can be considered as direct approach of appeal to people fallacy, because the arguer or the speaker is trying to incite, try to arouse the emotion of the audience by neglecting the importance of reason, and logic, right? You can remember, you can recall the example of Adolf Hitler's speech to assert the master race of the Aryans, to incite the Germans for the genocidal action of the Jews during the Second World War, right? More popularly used example, right? Adolf Hitler's speech to assert the superiority of the Aryans, right? It tries to stir up or erode the crowd's emotion and enthusiasm, aiming to gain acceptance for their conclusion, right? Direct approach, when a single person addressing a large group of people. Indirect approach involves the arguer targeting individual within a crowd, separately focusing on a specific aspect of the relation within a larger group. This is mainly common in advertising world. Indirect approach is common where? Common mainly in advertising world, but it's not limited. It's not limited to advertising world. When people try to advertise their product or service, indirect approach of appeal to people are mainly common in those areas. Bandwagon, the arguer attempts to convince an individual to join the majority or follow popular opinion by suggesting that since everyone, now the key word lies here, everyone else is doing it, therefore you should do it, right? The bandwagon is associating a particular item, a particular product, or a particular service, or a particular conclusion, or a particular standpoint, or etc. with everyone, the large group of people, by neglecting the importance of reason or the importance of evidence for supporting or for not supporting it. Don't miss out on the latest fashion trend. Everyone is wearing this sneaker, and you should too if you want to be seen as fashionable in touch with the current style, right? Associate the particular item with large group of people rather than mentioning the qualities or the attributes that make it best among the others, right? Appeal to snobbery, it emphasizes on what? On elite group, or make a particular item associated with a selected few group of individuals, right? Selected few group of individuals. The desire for exclusivity is highlighted. The desire for exclusivity, or the desire for superiority is emphasized in appeal to snobbery, right? Desire, everyone has the desire to be exclusive, everyone has the desire to be member of selected few group of the large group, right? Example, this limited edition watch is reserved for the discerning conscientious who truly appreciates craftsmanship and luxury. Owning it will set you apart from the average consumer and elevate your status. This is typically snobbery fallacy, because it's emphasized on exclusivity and superiority other than the evidence or logic that support the entire argument, right? Appeal to vanity, it manipulates the desired personal ego or vanity. Emphasizing that accepting the conclusion will increase their status, attractiveness, or self-worth in the eye of others. Right? If you accept a particular conclusion, then you will increase your status, you will increase your attractiveness or self-worth in the eye of others, right? For example, use this sneaker product to achieve flawless skins and becomes the envy of your friends. Imagine the compliment you will receive. Look, receive, and how much more confident you will feel if you accept this particular item, right? These are mainly common in advertising world, but they are not limited. They are not limited in advertising world, even though they are most common in advertising world. Appeal to vanity, it exploits the emotion of increasing one's status or attractiveness and self-worth in the eye of others. And whereas appeal to snobbery, it has to do with setting oneself apart from the average and being member of the larger group of people, right? The bandwagon, associating a product or an item or a conclusion with a large group of people. Appeal to pity, argumentum ad misericordiam, is an attempt to support a conclusion by merely evoking pity in one's audience. The structure is X is true. It would be terrible if X was not true. Therefore, X must be true. Humans are naturally inclined to help others in distress. Seeing someone in pain activates, arouses our empathy, making us want to ease their burden. This vulnerability will leave us to be susceptible to manipulating emotion to influence or to be swayed by appeal to pity. It will influence our judgment, right? So in order to get rid of appeal to pity, the mechanism that we need to employ is to be able to separate the plea or the claim, the general argument from fact, and question the logic, consider the alternative solution, right? Look at the examples. But professor, I'm already on the probation. If I don't pass this course, then my student status will be in jeopardy. the situation is unfortunate. It doesn't automatically guarantee passing the course. The student need to demonstrate academic merits, not only on not based on PT. Sir, I need this job badly. I have a wife and 3 kids to feed. You really think he would be capable of such an act? Look at him, that poor things. Your Honor, before you reach a verdict, I want you to consider the fact that my client is the sole provider of this elected parents, one of whom was recently diagnosed with terminal illness. Right? Now, these are all considered to be appeal to PT fallacy. Why? Because the emotion of PT is replacing reason and evidence. Just like appeal to force fallacy, appeal to PT fallacy has its own exception. We can use the emotion of PT in certain legitimate, appropriate manner. Right? This does not mean that using PT or misericordium or compassion is always wrong. There are situations or circumstances where using PT can be considered as appropriate, right? But these are all fallacious arguments, because in all these circumstances, the arguer tries to replace emotion of pity, the emotion instead of reason, right? In other words, the arguer is trying to argue something about which he or she could have changed it into the better, but he fails to change the better because of his laziness or etc., right? But there are certain exceptions to appeal to pity. Exception to appeal to pity, not everyone appeal to compassion or pity falls into the fallacy trap. Genuine cause for empathy can be both powerful and ethically sound. Here are examples. Appeal to pity fallacy versus genuine appeal. Fallacy exploits emotion without substantial evidence or justifiable response. It uses pity as a shortcut by passing logic and fact, whereas genuine appeal presents compelling evidence of suffering and propose reasonable response based on empathy and sound reasoning. For example, as a result of war and famine, thousands of children in country X are malnourished. You can help by sending money to relief agency Y. Therefore, please send whatever you can to spare relief agency Y. This is what? An argument based on pity, based on compassion, but it may not be considered as fallacious. Why? Even though the ground, the foundation of this argument is pity, it may not be considered as fallacious. Why? كف يالو. Yes, you. This is not argument appeal to pity fallacy. Because can you justify? Khalid Mustafa, yes. Yes, good. Because unlike the previous example, in this example, the arguer is not trying to replace reason or logic with pity or compassion, but trying to what? Trying to argue about something which is something beyond his or her control. About drought, famine, malnourishment. Just something beyond one's control. Whereas in the previous example, if you look back to the previous example, the arguer is trying to assert something about which he or she could have changed it, but fails to change it because of his responsibility or etc., right? Something related to that. In this example, the arguer is not trying to assert something about something which falls within the domain of his control, but something outside of his control, right? The arguer, it may not be considered as fallacious, right? The claim of malnutrition, but at the same time, we need to be careful, right? We need to be critical in scrutinizing the evidence presented. The claim of the malnourishment due to war and famine needs to be verified. Are there credible source or report supporting this claim? Justification for pity? Are the children truly in In dire need of aid, understanding the severity of the situations fuels genuine compassion, right? Reasonable response. Is sending money to relief agency? Why? Is most effective and appropriate? Are there alternative solution or better equipped organization or etc.? Something that we need to be aware of before giving a response to that particular appeal, right? There are certain occasions or circumstances, argument based on pity or compassion may not be considered as fallacious, right? May not be, it will not be always be considered as fallacious. Argument against the person, as the name implies, it attempts to discredit an argument by discrediting the arguer. On slide number 18, you can find the slide. Against the person, the name itself tell us about its essential feature. Ad hominem fallacy attempts to discredit an argument by discrediting the arguer. Ad hominem had three fallacy: abusive, circumstantial, and tukok. Abusive, respondents verbally abuse the arguer and ignores the argument. Circumstantial, respondent calls attention to special circumstance, interest or motive of the arguer and ignores the argument. Tukok is what? It's a Latin term. Tukok is a Latin term which refers to what? Tukok fallacy? Not beforehand. Tukok, it's a Latin term which refers to? Tukok is what? Latin term? Huh? Hypocrisy, yes, very good. What is the single word that replaced tukok? Single word. No, U2. U2. U-T-O-O. U2. Yes. Tukok is a Latin term, which also known as U2 fallacy. Respondent attempts to make the arguer look hypocritical. Hypocrisy refers to what? What kind of person is hypocritical? A hypocrite. A hypocrite. A hypocrite is a person not judgmental. A hypocrite is a person who says something and do something else. Yes. Who says something and do something else. Whose action contradicts. Whose action contradicts or whose speech contradicts. Hypocrisy, right? A respondent attempts to make the arguer look hypocritical. In tukok fallacy, the respondent attempts to make the arguer look hypocritical. Let's see them separately. Ad hominem, abusive, is the Latin term for against the person, is a fallacy that involves attacking the person making an argument instead of addressing the argument itself. This fallacy occurs when the attack on the person is completely irrelevant. It's the argument, right? Which suggests that attack on the person can be relevant sometimes. Attack or remark. It can be sometimes rarely be accepted as logically appropriate. Attacking or remarking or filtering out the weak side of the personality of a person, right? But attacking the person is considered fallacious when the attack is not directly relevant to the argument being made. The attack is not relevant to the argument being made. Look at the example. Tony claimed that the origin of life was an accident, but how can we trust him? He is a godless person who has spent more time in jail than in church. Godless person. It's a direct attack. Abuse. It's a direct attack of the person which has nothing to do with the argument being made. The argument is about what? The origin of life. His argument about the origin of life do not have anything at all with his personality, whether he is a godless person or whether he is a believer. Believer, right? It's typically abusive fallacy. The person making the argument attacks Tony's personally by stressing his lack of religious belief and criminal history. However, these personal characteristics are entirely irrelevant to the argument Tony is making about the origin of life. Right? But there are situations when verbal remarking can be considered as appropriate. When? What condition must be met for abusive ad hominem can be considered as appropriate and legitimate? First condition, as you can suggest, the abuse or the attack must be directly relevant to the argument being made. The abuse must be directly related to the argument being made in areas such as job interview and election leadership. In situations such as during election or job interview, questioning the candidate's past ethical lapse, past ethical gap on financial matter is relevant to a position requiring financial integrity. This is not abusing. It's assessing their fit for the role, right? Questioning their ethical past, whether he or she has an ethical corruption allegation. Assessing one's ethical past is not abusive fallacy, right? The same thing is true during election campaign. In politics, questioning candidates' intellectual ability, moral compass, and even charisma is appropriate. This quality directly impacts their competence and suitability for leadership. And it may not be considered as abusive, right? In expertise and trust, whenever evaluating scientific claim, considering source past record or providing accurate and verifiable information, right? It is valid, and we weight the credibility of the message before accepting their message, right? So the most important thing is that the abuse is directly relevant to the subject in question, to the argument being made. However, if the abuse is not related to the argument being made, then the fallacy of what? Ad hominem arises. The fallacy of abusive occurs, right? Fallacy of ad hominem may not be always be considered as fallacious. There are certain circumstances or situations where abusing or verbally attacking a person can be considered as appropriate when the subject in question is related to the verbal remark. Circumstantial ad hominem is committed when someone attempts to what? Refute an argument by attacking the motive or circumstance of the person who is making it, rather than addressing the argument itself. This tactic is logically fallacious because the speaker's personal situation does not inherently affect the truth of the validity. Truth personal does not inherently affect the truth or validity of their claim. Right? An argument falls to the circumstantial ad hominem fallacy when its rejection is based on who is making it rather than what's being said. This fallacy assumes that someone's vested interest or life experience automatically translated into their opinion is unreliable, which is not necessarily true. Circumstance, by mentioning circumstance of the person, or by mentioning the motive, or by mentioning the interest of the person. Look at the example. A politician claims that. Read the first example louder. Politician claimed that in the country's best interest to expand oil production. Her proponent claimed that she is only saying that because her state benefits from oil production. What is the motive? What is the circumstance in this example? The motive is what? Her state benefits from oil production, isn't it? The motive is that her state benefits from oil production. The respondent tried to refute the original argument by mentioning the motive or the interest of the speaker, not by directly addressing the original argument, but by mentioning motive, interest, or circumstance of the speaker. Right? The politician's argument focuses on the country's best interest, while her opponent attacks her motive by suggesting that she is biased due to her state benefit. Right? Circumstantial fallacy occurs when the respondent emphasized on the motive by neglecting the importance of the original argument. The same thing is true for the second argument. Paul argued that more girls should serve on the student council. Nati said that she only believed that because she is a girl. Right? Mentioning interest, motive, or circumstance of the person in order to refute, reject, or criticize the original argument is typically the essential characteristic feature of ad hominem circumstantial, right? The same thing is true for the third and the fourth examples, right? Mentioning circumstance, interest of the original argument in order to refute their argument, right? Ad hominem circumstantial fallacy. To cock U2 is by mentioning what? Contradictory actions, or by mentioning contradictory speech, or by presenting the arguer look hypocritical, right? By presenting the arguer look hypocritical. For example, claim A person A tell you to eat more vegetables for better health, and to cock fallacy, you retort, you angrily reply to him, you never eat vegetable yourself, so why should I listen to you? Right? Animal right, environmental conservations, and many other areas, to cock fallacies can be implicitly or explicitly be committed, right? Environmental conversations and persons say advocates for reducing single-use plastics. To cock, you counter, but you drive a guzzling SUV. How can you preach about the environment? In all cases, the to cock fallacy is committed by focusing on the person's perceived hypocrisy, contradictions, rather than addressing the merit of the actual argument, right? It's important to remember that inconsistency does not always yield strongness. Someone can advocate for positive change even if they have perfectly achieved it themselves. Focused on the argument, evaluate the argument based on its logic, evidence, and reason, not the speaker's personal history. Of course, inconsistency suggests something about the person's personality, but it does not directly translate into the argument's fallaciousness. Right? A person who contradicts his action, a person who contradicts his speech, is somehow likely to produce valid or non-fallacious argument, but his contradiction, his inconsistency, or his or her hypocrisy does not directly translate into making his original argument fallacious. One's inconsistency, contradiction, does not yield his original argument fallacious. Right? We need to separate one's hypocrisy from the argument that he or she is making it. Right? To cock argument, however, creates a kind of necessary connection between hypocrisy and the fallacious nature of one's argument, right? Fallacious nature of one's argument. It does not automatically invalidate one's argument. Strawman is committed when someone attempts to refute an argument by attacking a distorted, exaggerated, or simplified version of the original argument rather than engaging with actual claims or reasoning presented. This fallacious tactic creates illusion of successfully defeating the opponent's position while ignoring its more substantial point. Right? As it's demonstrated in the picture, a real man is arguing against fictitious man. Fictitious or unreal man. And finally, concluding as if the original real argument is refuted, right? Arguing against a false or distorted version of someone's actual argument. The people tend to distort, exaggerate the original argument for the purpose of easily attacking it, right? They distort, they exaggerate, they simplify the original version for the purpose of easily refuting it. Right? Strawman occurs when the original argument is ignored and when the arguer tries to assert as if the original argument is criticized. Look at examples. Pro-choice is absurd. How could anyone support killing an innocent human being? It's a strawman fallacy. Why? Pro-choice is absurd. How could anyone support killing an innocent human being? This is plain exaggeration. Misrepresentation of the practice of pro-choice. Pro-choice is not the same as killing an innocent human being. Pro-choice is what? Pro-choice. It's a kind of family planning, isn't it? It's a kind of family planning, right? But the person associates pro-choice with what? Killing an innocent human being. For the purpose of easily refuting it. For the purpose of easily attacking it, right? The strawman associates the original argument with exaggerated, misrepresented, or distorted version of it for the purpose of easily refuting it. This protest approach is positioned as solely focused on ending life, ignoring arguments based on bodily autonomy, reproductive right, and multifaceted view on fetal development, right? It ignores other complexities associated with it, but it associates the original argument with a distorted, misrepresented view of it for the purpose of easily attacking it. The same thing is true for the second example. Egalitarianism is wrong because it is the same as communism. It's typically straw man. It associates egalitarianism with the extreme form of socialism, which is communism. Egalitarianism contains some form of capitalism and some form of socialism. It's not the same as the extreme version of socialism, which is communism. But he equates egalitarianism with communism for the purpose of easily refuting or easily criticizing it, right? It falsely equates egalitarianism, which seeks equal opportunities and outcomes, with a specific economic system of communism, disregarding other egalitarian approach and ignoring potential difference in goals and implementation, right? Strawman fallacy are essentially characterized by distorting, exaggerating, misrepresenting the original argument for the purpose of easily attacking it. Strawman means to distort, to exaggerate, or to equate the original argument with its extreme version, for the purpose of easily refuting it. Accident fallacy occurs when a general principle is misapplied to an exceptional case that it was not designed to address, leading to an erroneous conclusion. Driving above the speed limit is legal, therefore it should be legal to drive faster than the speed limit even in emergencies. Is typically accident fallacy. A general rule is used to cover a specific case to which it's not intended to cover. What is the general rule in this example? General rule. Driving above the speed limit is illegal, therefore it should be illegal to drive faster than the speed limit even in emergencies. The general rule is Kanan. What's the general rule in the example? What is the general rule in the example? Driving above the speed limit is illegal, therefore it should be illegal to drive faster than the speed limit, even in emergencies. The general rule is yes, good. The general rule is just the first sentence, right? Driving above the speed limit is illegal. It's a general rule, right? Therefore, it should be legal to drive faster than speed limit, even in emergency. It's a specific case to which the general was not intended to cover it, right? Using a general rule to cover a specific case to which it's not intended to cover it. Accident fallacy, when the general rule or principle is used to cover a specific case to which it's not intended to cover. Taking a life is a crime and moral wrong, therefore termite control is a crime and moral wrong. Birds can fly, therefore it must be able to fly. Nuts are proven to have a variety of great health benefit to people, therefore it must be right to say that everyone should be eating them. Whoever thrusts a knife into a person should be arrested, but surgeons do precisely when operating, therefore surgeons should be arrested. These are all accident fallacy in which a general rule is used to cover a specific case to which it's not intended to cover. It's not intended to cover, right? A general rule or principle, right? These accidents are typically tricks. They are tricks. They can be knowingly, consciously be used by the arguer in order to mislead or trap the audience, right? They are tricks. The general rule can be consciously, deliberately used by the speaker in order to mislead the audience, right? Missing the point, a general rule is used to cover a specific case. Missing the point, the fallacy missing the point is also known as ignoration. Lynching occurs when someone ignores or fails to address the actual issue at hand and instead presents a conclusion that's not logically connected to the premise, right? In order to recognize and avoid this fallacy, one should be able to identify the correct conclusion that logically follows from the given premise, right? In missing the point, a particular problem is mentioned and the conclusion come up with a particular solution which do not have any direct relation to the problem at hand, right? Problem is mentioned, the given solution is not directly relevant to the problem at hand. Crime of theft and robbery have been increasing at an alarming rate. Therefore, the conclusion is obvious. We should establish this penalty, right? By emotionally rushing into a particular conclusion which do not have any relation or irrelevant relation with the conclusion, with the premise at hand. You can think of some other alternative solution other than the solution being offered in the argument. Crime of theft and robbery have been increasing at alarming rate. Therefore, we should establish this penalty. It's what? Missing the point. Why? We can think of more appropriate solution other than establishing this penalty. What would be appropriate solution? Increasing the police force, increasing the job opportunity, or etc., right? Another mechanism that will be directly be a solution to the problem at hand rather than establishing this penalty, right? Missing the point. It ignores or fails to address the actual issue at hand and instead presents a conclusion that's not logically connected to the premise, but it's emotionally rush into establishing a kind of extreme solution to the problem at hand, right? There is a problem and the solution offered is not directly related to the problem at hand. Missing the point. It involves emotional appeal or urgency of the situation might cause it to address the situation rather than considering alternative solution, right? Red herring, it's a kind of metaphorical name to the fallacy. Red herring, literally, it's what? It's a kind of fish. Red herring, literally, it's a kind of fish in the North Caribbean countries that has got strong smell that's capable of diverting the attention of the dog away from the right track. Right? The fallacy of red herring derived its name from a fish which has got strong smell that's capable of diverting the attention of the dog away from the right track. But technically, it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy that redirects the attention of the audience by introducing a different topic, which may be subtly related but not directly related. It's original issues, right? It redirects or diverts the original argument by introducing issues related to sex, or issues related to money, or issues related to political power, or etc., right? I've got the power to divert the attention of the original argument away from the original track, right? Just like the dog is being misled or being misdirected from the original argument but because of the existence of red herring fish. Right? The fallacy is also known as off-the-track fallacy. Its purpose is to divert the attention and steer the discussion away from the main point or topic being discussed. Right? It does not address the original argument, but it introduces some sensitive and attractive issues that are capable of diverting the original argument and finally assert as if the original argument has been addressed. Look at the example in business, arguing against giving rise. Sure, we have not given rise in over 5 years to our employees. You know, we work really hard to make a good product. We try to ensure the best customer service. Now, what is the argument, the original argument, and what is the sensitive issues being introduced, and what must be the focus of the argument, right? In identifying red herring, we need to be aware of these three fundamental elements: original argument, the attractive issues, and what must be the focus of the original argument. In the first example, the original argument is about what? Employees having received raise in 5 years, right? This was the original track. But the arguer introduced some sensitive issues, which is not directly related to the original argument. The company's effort and service, which somehow sensitive and attractive issues that are capable of diverting the original argument away from the original track. The focus must be the argument should address the merit of the race based on the factors like employees' performance, cost of living, and market competition. But he ignores the focus and come up with some sensitive and attractive issues for the purpose and finally try to assert as if the original question has been settled or as if the original question has been answered, right? The same thing is true in the second example. In politics, defending one's own policy regarding public safety, I have worked hard to help eliminate criminal activity. What we need is economic growth that can only come from the hands of the leadership. The argument is what? The political cells, their effort they advertise their effort against crime, and he come up with some sensitive and attractive issues, economic growth in order to divert the attention of the original argument and finally assert as if the original argument has been settled or the original argument has been answered, right? So the red herring is characterized by what? By bringing sensitive, attractive issues which do not have any relation with the original argument being raised. Issues such as political power, economic issues, or sexual issues, or etc., right? Which do not have any direct, relevant, logical relation with the argument being made, right? And assert as if the original argument has been addressed. Strawman and red herring, yes. What's the difference between strawman and red herring? Strawman is characterized by what? Exaggerating the original argument for the purpose of easily attacking it. Whereas red herring is bringing certain issues which do not have any relation with the original argument, but for the purpose of diverting the original argument away from the original track and asserting as if the original question has been addressed, right? Red herring is diverting, whereas strawman is exaggerating. Strawman is exaggerating, red herring is diverting. Red herring is diverting, whereas strawman is a manager is announcing to his staff that they will be moving business location and there will be a job loss as a result. The manager says to his team, we will be moving our business to Mexico. Some jobs will be lost, but Mexico has incredible weather and beautiful beach. This is typically red herring fallacy. The arguer is not trying to address the original argument, but come up with sensitive and attractive issues that will be capable of diverting the original argument away from the original track and assert as if the original issue has been addressed. The best way to understand fallacy is to look at examples. The best way to understand fallacies is to look at as many examples as possible, right? By looking into their definition may not help us to understand, comprehend the real nature of fallacies. Kanan, read the first example. Taxpayer to judge.
Your Honor, I admit that I employ 13 children as dependents on my tax return, even though I have only 2. But if you find me guilty of tax evasion, my reputation will be ruined. I'll probably lose my job. My poor wife will not be able to have the operation that she desperately needs, and my kids will starve. Surely I am not guilty.
Very good. Which fallacy of relevance is committed in this passage? Very good. Nice. Appeal to force, appeal to pity, argumentum ad populum, red herring, strawman, accident. Which fallacy of relevance is committed and why? Your name is Kadist Mandafro, right? Kalkida Mandafro, yes. It's appeal to pity. Yes, appeal to pity. Justification. We have said appeal to pity has certain exceptions, right? Certain exceptions. And why it's considered as fallacious? No, remember by why? It's appeal to pity, yes. Justification. Why? Yes, እንዲያዝኑለት መሞከር ምንጊዜም fallacious ላይሆን ይችላል። There are certain occasions like just country malnourished ብለን የጠቀስነው example ታስታውስ ትችላለሽ. Because he's not. Yes, because of his lack of responsibility, laziness, or etc. Right? The arguer trying to assert something which could have been managed to control it. Or the respondent may think of other alternative solution to respond to the arguer, to the speaker, other than accepting the conclusion. Without accepting the conclusion, you can think of ways to help him. You can think of mechanisms, you can think of means to help support his miserable condition. His unfortunate condition can be solved without accepting the conclusion. I admit that I declare certain children as dependent on my tax return, even though I have only 2. But if you find me guilty of tax evasion, my reputation will be ruined. I will probably lose my job. My poor wife will not be able to have the operation that she desperately needs, and my kids will starve. Surely I am not guilty. In order to prove that he's not guilty, he came up with some sort of compassion arousing or stirring the emotion of pity. Right? This is directly appeal to pity. Appeal to pity. The person could have think of some other alternative solution that he could deal with his unfortunate situation rather than accepting that he is guilty, right? No one should go to war. After all, everyone knows that one should not kill another person. Next to Kanan, your name? Kalkidan, father. Kanan, father name. Yes. Kanan Alamayu. No one should ever go to war. After all, everyone knows that one should not kill another person. This is typically what? Appeal to pity, appeal to force, appeal to people, strawman, accident, bandwagon, snobbery, vanity. Strawman, no? It's what? Typically, your name? Kanan? Kanan what? Alamayu? Ayal, yes. What do you think? Which fallacy of relevance is it? Accident fallacy. Very good. It's accident. Typical accident. Justify.
We are using a general
Rule?
rule.
Yes. Because the writer or the speaker is using a general rule. No one should ever go to war. After all, everyone knows that one should not kill another person. A specific case to which it's not intended to cover. Right? People go to war. For what? Just war. There are just war and unjust war. Just war and unjust war. Right? The general rule is used to cover a specific case to which it's not intended to cover. It's not intended to cover. Everyone knows that one should not kill another person. In just war, of course, people kill each other. You should read Daniel's latest book. Your name? Yes. You should read number 3. Yes, which fallacy of relevance? Appeal to people, specifically bandwagon, vanity, snobbery. It's what? Bandwagon. Very good. It's bandwagon. Surely you welcome. Next, Khalid. Yes, very good. Which fallacy of relevance? Appeal to pity, appeal to force, appeal to people, accidents, red herring, strawman. Appeal to force, very good. Appeal to force, correctly. Something is seriously wrong with the university. Next to college. Something is seriously. Yes, read this louder, please.
Something is seriously wrong with the university education these days. After 12 years of decline, scores are still extremely low. The university graduates are practically incapable of reading and writing. The obvious conclusion is that we should close the university.
Yes, this. It's directly with fallacy of relevance, is it? Kena, can you detect which fallacy of relevance? It's easily detectable, isn't it? We should close the university. He's emotionally rushing to close the universities. Some problem is mentioned, therefore university must be closed. Can think of some other solution other than closing the university, isn't it? But the arguer force. He runs into closing the universities altogether without considering appropriate solutions. Which fallacy? Problem mentioned, solution offered is not directly relevant. The fallacy is happy to? Missing the point. Missing the point, yes. Missing the point. Problem mentioned, the solution offered is not directly related. Professor Ballard's argument in favor of next to, yes, read it louder. Stand up. Stand up. Professor Ballard. I tell you? Okay, next. Next, stand up. No, anta kuch bol.
Professor Ballard's argument certain outdoors of reading newspapers. It was an exploit from someone who published research in your controls. In the degree, Ballard's research picture of Aristotle was 2006.
Which fallacy of relevance? Yes. Huh? Relevance. Okay. Which fallacy of relevance? Appeal to people, appeal to force, pity. Yes. Yes, appeal to? Appeal to what? For instance, not words, but what would you expect from someone who published in such mediocre journal? And did you hear Ballard's recent lecture on Aristotle? It was nonsense. It's typical what? Abusive. It's abusive. Ad hominem, abusive. Abusing one's person's personality rather than facing the argument as it is. It's typically abusive. When is abusive, ad hominem abusive or verbal remarking is considered appropriate? When? Verbal remarking is appropriate when? Yes. When the attack is related to the argument being made during election campaign or during job interview or mentioning the historical track record of the respondent can be considered as appropriate and without a fallacious